Welcome to another segment of Out and Informed on therapycable.com. This is the program about issues concerning the LGBTQ community. This is going to be the second in our series with Joe Kort, who's a therapist and author and expert on sex therapy and sexual identity issues. Joe, thanks for being here.
Oh, it's nice being here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. Let's see. I think that really today's show is about gay-affirmative therapy. And I think for some clinicians that might be a new idea. Maybe we tend to think that, well, I think I'm one of those because I'm gay-friendly or I'm gay-tolerant. And I really think that that Joe has really written the quintessential book on what it means to be a gay-affirmative therapist. And this is the book. Joe, what does it mean to be a gay-affirmative therapist?
It means exactly what you said. I loved it. It's beyond gay-friendly. It's gay-informed. It's really knowing how to identify for your clients these subtle forms of internalized homophobia, which you and I talked about before we started airing here, that it's very subtle and clients won't even know it. They'll just be talking, and really the therapist's keen ears, educated ears, has to be listening for how are they as a couple or either how are they as an individual expressing internalized homophobia. What are the and it's really about having cultural competency. We think about that when we work with minorities. Being gay and lesbian is a minority. And most importantly, what I tried to put in that book, which is really a part of all my work, is remembering that we were once gay and lesbian children.
I think that's super important.
And that's super important because I always joke, we didn't get here from some gay planet at 18 and infiltrate a straight community. We were here all along.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is really one of the most important pieces, recognizing that, gay adults were once gay kids. And we went through the same stages of recognizing that there's a difference, and for straight kids, when they hit that age where they're starting to date and figure out how to make relationships, and probably making up and breaking up every other day, or, maybe having a boyfriend or girlfriend for 3 weeks and then introducing their girlfriend or boyfriend to mom and dad and getting pats on the back for that and validation. Gay kids are learning how to conceal themselves and how to hide, and their identity is I think their true self tends to shrink, and sometimes a false self tends to grow. And I wonder if you could speak to that issue of the different development that LGBT kids go through.
Yeah, I love the way you said that. You said it really nicely. It's so true. It really is a burial of oneself, and because there's no. Dan Savage, that sex advice columnist, sex educator, said it so well that schools, churches, parents don't allow gays access to children to educate them on anything other than heterosexuality. So there's nowhere to find yourself. There's nowhere to explore yourself in any other way than heterosexuality. And it does force a false self so that you start becoming rewarded for living out of integrity, thinking you're straight, play acting. And really, if we did these things to straight children, forcing them to pretend they're gay, to have their first love be a person of the same gender, we would understand that's a form of sexual abuse. It's a form of sexual violation, developmental violation, but the same outcry doesn't exist for gay and lesbian children.
Right.
And yet every day, that's the very thing that's happening.
Yeah, and one of the other terms that the first time I ever heard it was in your book, where you talk about covert cultural sexual abuse. And I wonder if you could talk about that, because for me it was really eye-opening, because I had one of those light bulb moments where I went, oh, that's what happened, with all of the shaming and all of that.
Yeah, because when you look at the signs and symptoms of someone who's been sexually abused, that you can parallel them very easily with growing up gay, because, and I always try to warn people, I'm not saying we were sexually abused.
Right.
And to my horror, young people still think they might be gay because they were sexually abused. Sexual abuse can't alter your sexual orientation.
Right.
It can only bury somebody's sexual awareness of their orientation. So, but the symptoms are the same, where you have to keep a sexual secret. You have to pretend nothing's wrong. You have to overcompensate for feeling like damaged goods.
Right.
That your sexuality is hijacked by the perpetrator. In our case, heterosexism. That and homophobia. People who are saying your only way of acceptance here is through the doorway of heterosexuality. That's abusive. And so it's a sexual assault. It's a developmental assault, and it creates problems every stage of our growing.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that when I started working with people in the LGBT community, I started recognizing things, and I started recognizing that different clients would have symptoms of like PTSD, trauma. It's like this feels like trauma, but I explore trauma history, and there really there really was no history of trauma. So I started looking at developmental trauma, relationship trauma, and really finding that you're absolutely right that those two things, when you look at them side by side, they're very the effects are very similar and
very parallel.
Yeah, and I also recognize that there's a lot of shame, and this I think one of the core pieces of shame is the feeling that for some reason there's something wrong with me, and it has something to do with something that I have absolutely no control over. I can't change it.
Yes.
And it becomes sort of avoiding that shame becomes a way of life, leading into addictive patterns and compulsive patterns a lot. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about shame and the effects that it has on people.
Oh, yeah. Because that's really what it is. I like what you're saying. It is a post-traumatic stress disorder that we end up living with. It's very traumatic. There's no one to talk to, not even God, because we're taught that even God doesn't want anything to do with us. So I'll have people say, when I talk about religious abuse or religious shame, they'll say, well, I had that, I'm Catholic or I'm Jewish and I was taught this and I was taught that. And I always say, yes, you had it, but it was about a behavior. This is about our identity.
Who you are.
Who we are. Right. We are taught God would. So the shame is so profound. And we know the difference between guilt and shame, right? Shame is, I am bad.
Right.
Guilt is, I did something bad.
Right.
So even though we've done nothing as gay children, we've been taught from the beginning, we are damaged goods and there's no correcting this, and we're going to be at risk because of it.
Yeah, and it leads to, as you point out, it leads to secret keeping, concealing your true identity, cognitive distortions, behavioral issues, and I wonder if you could talk about how growing up gay in a straight world affects people's access to intimacy and relationships.
Right, so our imprint, I always say this, the imprint of gays and lesbians is to run from each other. That's our childhood. So then now we're in our teenage years or our adult years, and our impulse is to run toward each other, but this imprint says, no, stay back, stay away. So we have all these intimacy barriers, and we find unavailable partners. We believe that what society says is right about us, our relationships will never last, that there's something wrong with two men or two women. It starts infiltrating in our sex lives, that there's something wrong with the kind of sex we're having. There's a right way and a wrong way. And it just causes all kinds of havoc. And most gays and lesbians, they don't address it. They just come out because we have this idea, belief that if you come out, you're going to be okay. No, if you come out, you're going to be better. But all the unresolved issues are coming out of that closet too. I call them dust bunnies.
Yeah. So in the room, working with somebody, how as a clinician do we help people? Is it all a psychoeducational thing, or how do we help people to work on understanding the impact of this imprinting and moving through it?
So I always tell therapists, do what you've been trained to do. The family histories still matter. The socialization histories still matter. Developmental histories still matter. But a gay and lesbian history also matters. So when did you first discover your homosexuality? What messages did you hear? I do a lot of workshops with gays and lesbians, and one of them, somebody said, because I always say, my clients will talk about, I remember a nun saying this. I remember my father saying, that's where all the bags go. he said, and that really hurts us. And one client said, it's not just that they said it, they meant it. And that's what's so bad. We're like gay little spies. And as that spy, we're listening and we see the real deal. And even though our parents may tell us everything's safe, that memory is haunting.
Right.
And so that is, therapists have to ask those questions. You know, what was your first crush? How did that manifest? How didn't it manifest? What were the messages? A lot of therapists miss the boat on this.
Yeah, and I think that there's so many times when you know, you might, growing up, you might hear those little things about, oh, somebody's queer or whatever, and without anybody saying it, you kind of put two and two together and you figure out, oh wow, that must be something really bad, and I think that's what I am, and that's that part, you know, that we start hiding even to ourselves. Yeah, very, very important.
I think therapists also need to teach clients about the trauma of growing up gay and really helping them understand that coming out reactivates the trauma because you're releasing a secret that you've kept your whole life.
Right.
And really helping clients understand the coming out process, that there are stages. A lot of therapists don't know those stages. And the client feels better knowing the stages so that they know there's a trajectory and that they're on a path that's normative for them, not something that's odd.
Yeah, I've talked a little bit about the Cass stages of coming out, and also Alan Downs' stages of working through shame, and how do you understand the identity formation models, and how do you sort of work with them?
I do that. I give them a handout of Cass model because I love it. I also love Eli Coleman's model, if you've ever seen his, because it's very similar to Cass, but what he says, and it's so true, he's got the additional stage of falling in love with somebody, because that's what ends up happening. You think of Ellen DeGeneres, you think of Rosie O'Donnell, they will say, I didn't come out until I fell in love and knew I was in a relationship, because it's like a validation, societal validation. But I actually try to train therapists to understand what each stage means. And so, for instance, if a client comes in and he's in the early stages of coming out, he's not going to use the word gay. So for me to push the word gay on him, so he might use the word homosexual or deviant or pervert or whatever. I mean, I'm not going to reinforce that, but I will help him. I won't force or rush his process, because in doing so, it's going to re-traumatize him.
And in the book, you also talk about some of the ways that this trauma sort of parallels other mental health issues. And I wonder if you could talk about that. How, the effects of it all can mirror things like borderline personality traits or anxiety, depression, all of those different things.
Right, so growing up gay and keeping it a secret is sort of creates this hypervigilance. So you're always scanning, is it safe or is it dangerous? And really sets a tone for a high level of anxiety, not knowing if it's safe to come out, not knowing who is safe. And so it can look like somebody has generalized anxiety disorder when in fact it's perfectly acceptable given how one had to grow up and how we're staying closeted. And then the whole borderline, the whole splitting off, that's what we end up doing as children, is splitting off our personality, compartmentalizing. We're rewarded for it. So we look split off, we look borderline, we look characterological because we are rewarded for the lying, for the pretending. And so what happens is when somebody comes out and starts integrating their gay selves, their borderline tendency, the way they might look, goes away. Now, I will say this, and I think I might have said it in the book, that if the longer people are closeted, the longer their personality sort of becomes borderline-y. I'm not saying they really are, but it's like I've just noticed it's harder to change that personality to make impact on it.
Right. Yeah. Staying in the closet for a long period of time. I think it's you're sort of suppressing, pushing down a really vital aspect of who you are. And yeah, I think. And I've just seen how it impacts people's ability to regulate their emotions, to really have true intimacy, and there's also an aspect of kind of splitting off sex from intimacy. And
Yeah.
I wonder if you could talk about understanding that also.
Yeah. So what I think about gay men is the culture is highly sexualized. There's no doubt. That doesn't have to mean it's pathological, and it doesn't have to mean it's necessarily gay. If it was gay, then lesbians would be overly sexualized, and they're not. But when we aren't, so when we're there as children, when we're cutting off our gay and lesbian sense of self, we're not able to connect to other people. Sex is an easy way to connect. It feels deep. It's easy. It's fast. It's quick. So we're connecting through sex, thinking that it gives us a feeling of belonging, a feeling of I'm attached to you in some way.
Right.
Because we don't know how to do that. So a lot of gay men use sex in order to be attached to each other. Sometimes, though, it ends up being that we deaden our sexual feelings so that there's nothing, and then we don't have access to our sexuality at all. And sometimes that happens to the gay men, but you see that also in lesbians. You see it quite a bit actually in lesbians, where because the sexism does the job right there, shutting down their sexuality. Then you got homophobia and heterosexism. That there's layers of that to come out, so it detaches them.
And how do as clinicians, how do we help people reintegrate healthy sexuality with healthy attachment and intimacy, and put those things back together again?
Well, I think one of the best things about being gay and lesbian is that we make up our own rules. So that can be a bad thing, but it can also be a good thing. And I always joke that I am going to write an article about everything good I've learned about sex is from a lesbian, because and I mean it, they don't count orgasms in general. They are not looking at penetration as the only way to have sex. They are, intimacy is often part of it. Not that, the one thing lesbians have to learn sometimes is that, intimacy doesn't always have to be part of sex. It's really about understanding that how you like sex and the way you like to have sex can be good enough. That there is no way. The heterosexist model is penetration, missionary style. Not even heterosexuals don't have to follow that and end up following it, and maybe it's not right for them. So we have an opportunity here to create our own sexual way.
Yeah. I think with all of the hopeful recent developments in our culture, with gay marriage being approved in more and more states, although it's still a battle, to achieve equality as far as civil rights and human rights, it's still traumatic, dealing with all of this stuff. And
Totally.
As far as, because I think a lot of therapists tend to watch this program, other than attending one of your workshops or reading your books and really doing the nuts and bolts work of becoming an affirmative therapist, what are a couple of things that people watching this program today can start to maybe instill in themselves to lead them to be more affirming so that they can work in a productive way with this population?
That's great. I think that every therapist should be getting the magazine or the newspaper that's local to them, so that they know and they read through what's happening in the community, what's happening nationally, whether even if they're looking at something online. I think they should have exposure in the gay community. Go to a gay pride fest. Go to the gay community. I have a long history of being transphobic, and it wasn't until, stupid as this sounds, RuPaul, watching Drag Race, getting used to it. I was so judgmental, just like every gay man out there about drag queens. Exposure to it, being around it at the Gay Community Center really helped me see them as people and start challenging me, like, what was this about for me? And then also how much I liked education around it. And a lot of therapists, so many of us are so arrogant. We think we know so much, and that just one client teaches us everything we need to know. That's not true. You really need to really know the community.
Yeah, and I think the piece that you put your finger on is recognizing your own internalized, phobias and stuff, and recognizing, oh wow, I've got some of that stuff myself, and being open to working on it and being real with yourself, so that you can be real with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Therapists need to. I think every therapist should be working on their own sexuality, their own sexual abuse histories, their own orientation issues, so that they can work with our population, because those are big parts of it.
Well, Joe, thank you once again. This has been a great endeavor into a really important topic of becoming a gay affirmative therapist. And thanks for kind of going into some of the issues. And I hope that people will read the book. I hope that people will really start working on understanding how they can apply some of these principles in their clinical work. So thank you very much. And our next segment we're going to talk about some of the 10 things that gay men can do to improve their lives. So this is the end of this segment. Join us for the next one, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.